In a city built on secrets, the deadliest ones hide in plain sight, behind aprons and menus, in the spaces between courses. Lumen Sky wasn't just a restaurant on the 51st floor. It was theater dressed as fine dining, where power came to perform civility. City councilmen traded votes over bone marrow appetizers. Tech moguls laundered reputations between pores of Chateau Margaux. And men like John Donald, the Korean investor who'd turned blood clubs into boardrooms, came to convince themselves the violence was finally behind them. He sat beneath pendant lights that glowed like captive stars, his tailored midnight suit concealing the ink that crawled up his neck, jaw set in the kind of dangerous calm people mistake for peace. To Bloomberg, he was the immigrant visionary. To the streets that still whispered Daejeon, he was the Busan tiger who'd never stopped hunting, just learned to wear better camouflage. Norris Clayton moved through the room like smoke, noticed only when you choked on it. No practiced smile. No choreographed warmth. Her powder blue uniform stayed crisp despite the heat of the kitchen. Her movements had the eerie precision of someone who'd been trained not to serve, but to survive. She didn't watch for tips. She tracked reflections in wine glasses, counted the seconds between elevator chimes, memorized which guests touched their phones too often. Her eyes didn't follow orders, they mapped kill zones. At 9:16 p.m., the illusion shattered. Glass didn't break, it exploded inward in a spray of diamond shards. 5 men in black tactical gear poured through the service entrance with the cold efficiency of people who'd done this before, who expected to do it again, who believed John Donald would die tonight. The room erupted into screams and scrambling bodies. John didn't run. Norris didn't freeze. She moved first, a silver serving tray spinning from her palm like a discus of reckoning, and the city learned that the most dangerous woman in the room had been clearing plates all along. But before we watch the 51st floor turn into a war zone, before we see who bleeds and who walks away, I need you to do something for me. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It keeps us together as we uncover these stories the world tries to bury. Drop a like, tell me where you're watching from in the comments, because knowing you're out there, scattered across time zones and cities, reminds me why we do this. Every click helps us keep pulling back the curtain on power, survival, and the people history forgets. Now, settle in. Find your quiet corner. Because this story doesn't wait. And neither does the woman who just became the only thing standing between a mafia boss and a bullet with his name on it. The moments before the breach were deceptively calm. Norris refilled a water glass at table 7, her reflection fractured across polished cutlery, arranged in perfect geometric precision. Each knife blade became a mirror, each fork tine a sightline. She'd been tracking angles all night, the way other servers tracked tips. To her left, John's Patek Philippe caught the pendant light, the second hand sweeping forward with metronomic certainty. Tick, tick, tick. She counted the rhythm, her mind cataloging exits, windows, the structural support columns that could stop a bullet. In the glass behind the bar, she watched a man in a charcoal suit check his phone 3 times in 2 minutes. Too nervous. Too deliberate. She tapped her apron hem twice, a habit she'd carried since the training that didn't officially exist, and moved toward the kitchen. That's when the world cracked open. The service entrance didn't just open, it detonated. 5 men in matte black tactical gear materialized like nightmares given form, their movements precise and predatory. 2 peeled left immediately, weapons raised toward the cluster of patrons near the western wall. 1 moved straight to the security camera nexus behind the host stand. 2 cut a direct line toward John Donald's table, their rifles tracking center mass with the kind of confidence that came from killing before. Norris's body reacted before thought intervened. The serving tray in her hand became a weapon. She pivoted, planting her rear foot, and hurled it like an Olympic discus thrower. The silver disc whistled through air thick with screams and struck the leftmost gunman across his temple. He staggered, his weapon dipping. She was already moving, snatching a plate from the nearest table with her offhand and snapping it like a frisbee into the wrist of the second man pinning the patrons. Bone cracked. His rifle clattered to marble. She didn't pause to admire her work. She slipped behind the velvet banquette, grabbed a wine bottle by its neck, and smashed it against the table edge. Jagged glass glinted blue-white under the pendant lights. The gunman who'd been advancing on her wheeled around, trying to track her movement. She drove the broken bottle into his gun hand. He screamed, a raw animal sound, and the weapon tumbled free. She swept his legs with a low kick that sent him crashing into an overturned chair. Across the room, John Donald moved like controlled violence. The first operative reached for him, and John's hand shot out faster than a man in tailored Italian wool should move. He caught the gunman's wrist mid-grab and twisted with brutal efficiency. The crack of bone echoed above the chaos. John drove his knee into the man's solar plexus, folding him like paper, then followed with a sharp elbow to the bridge of his nose. Blood sprayed across white linen. The operative collapsed. Two more rushed John from opposite flanks, trying to box him in. John swept left, evading the first man's grasping hands, and caught the second by the throat. His fingers found pressure points with surgical precision, the kind of anatomical knowledge that came from ending lives, not threatening them. The man's eyes rolled back. John released him and let gravity do the rest. He spun into the first attacker with a roundhouse kick that connected with devastating force. The man's head snapped sideways and he crumpled. For 3 heartbeats, Norris and John moved in perfect synchronization, their rhythms locking without a single word exchanged. Her misdirection, his precision, her angles, his execution. They had never trained together, never even spoken beyond polite service exchanges, but their bodies understood a shared language written in violence and survival. The last gunman standing raised his weapon toward Norris. John was already there, closing the distance with frightening speed. He caught the rifle barrel and twisted it upward as it discharged. The shot punched a hole in the ceiling, and plaster rained down like snow. John drove his forehead into the man's face, a vicious headbutt that shattered cartilage, then wrenched the weapon free and used it as a club. He brought the stock down on the operative's skull with finality. The man dropped. Silence fell like a curtain dropping on a stage. 5 men lay broken and bleeding across the marble floor. Guests sobbed behind overturned tables. John stood among the wreckage, chest heaving, a thin line of blood trickling from his hairline where the headbutt had split skin. His suit jacket was torn at the shoulder seam. He looked like a god of war, dressed for a shareholders' meeting. Then one of the fallen gunmen, the one Norris had struck with the tray, groaned and rolled onto his side. Blood streamed from his temple, but his eyes were clear, focused, burning with purpose. He raised his head and locked eyes with John. "Tell John the debt is due," he rasped. Then he triggered something on his vest. Smoke erupted in thick gray plumes, obscuring everything. Through the haze, Norris heard boots pounding toward the kitchen. She started after him, but John moved to follow, and she stepped into his path. "You'll chase into a funnel," she said, her voice flat and certain. John stopped, his body coiled to pursue, but something in her eyes, the mathematical certainty, the tactical assessment, made him pause. Respect flickered across his face. He nodded once. The smoke began to clear. Emergency lights strobed red and white. John immediately shifted into command mode. "Secure the room." He barked at his 2 bodyguards, who'd been dining at a discreet distance. "Get statements from everyone. No one leaves until we know what we're dealing with." Staff scrambled to comply. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. John turned to Norris. She stood utterly still, no tremor in her hands, no shock pallor in her face, no adrenaline babble, just cold mathematical assessment. Her eyes swept the room one more time, counting, cataloging, calculating. He'd seen that look before, in operators and soldiers, people trained to compartmentalize chaos into data. She walked to the floor manager, a thin man in his 50s who was shaking so hard he could barely stand. "Kill the HVAC loop," she said quietly. "The smoke will spread through the ventilation system otherwise. Manual override, northwest panel behind the bar." The manager stared at her. "That wasn't server knowledge. That was facilities protocol. The kind of system architecture only engineers or someone with operational training would know." John Donald had built an empire on reading people, on recognizing threats and assets. And Norris Clayton had just revealed herself as something far more dangerous than a waitress who could fight. She was someone who understood infrastructure, tactical response, threat assessment. She was an operator playing civilian. He approached her slowly. "You fight well," he said. She met his gaze without flinching. I serve well. Fighting was extra. The moment hung between them, heavy with questions neither was ready to ask. Outside, a black sedan that had been idling across the street pulled away from the curb and vanished into traffic. John's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. A message from Sung Ho, his security chief. Handled. No cops. Norris stepped away toward the service corridor, her powder blue uniform somehow still pristine, except for the blood spatter on her apron. In the shadows, she pulled a cracked flip phone from her pocket. The screen glowed with an incoming connection, a cell tower handshake from a number with no name. She stared at it for 3 seconds, then powered it off and slipped it back into her pocket. The lights of the city glittered beyond the shattered window, indifferent to the violence that had just rewritten 2 lives. Rain painted the curb in shifting mirrors, each droplet catching neon and headlights before surrendering to the storm drain. Norris stood at the bus stop on Wilshire, her powder blue uniform hidden beneath a black windbreaker, her hair pulled back tight. It was past midnight. The last bus had rolled through 20 minutes ago. She wasn't waiting for another one. The Maybach appeared without sound, gliding to the curb like a predator that had learned patience. Obsidian paint, tinted windows, chrome trim that caught the streetlight and threw it back cold. The rear door opened. John Donald sat in shadow, his midnight suit replaced by a charcoal sweater that made the tattoos on his neck more visible, more honest. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Get in, he said. Norris studied the vehicle. Mirror-mounted cameras angled inward for passenger surveillance. The driver's posture was military, shoulders square, eyes forward but awareness radiating backward. She noted the door locks, electronic not manual, child safety engaged from the driver's console, a rolling cage dressed as luxury. She stepped inside anyway. The door closed with the kind of solid click that cost 6 figures. Silence wrapped around them, insulated and absolute. John let it stretch for 3 blocks before speaking. One night, he said, "Help me find who brought them upstairs. After that, you walk away clean." "Equal, or I walk now," Norris replied. Her voice carried no negotiation, only geometry. This was the angle, or there was no deal. John studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Equal. His phone erupted before either could say more. The driver answered on the car's system, and a panicked voice filled the cabin. It was David, the night manager at Lumen Sky, his words tripping over each other in terror. "The wine cellar is burning. We tried to contain it, but the fire spread too fast. Miguel, the dishwasher. He was down there doing inventory, and we can't find him. The smoke is everywhere. We need help." John's jaw tightened, rage flickering behind his eyes like heat lightning. But Norris leaned forward, her voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. "David, listen to me. Evacuate everyone to the north stairwell, not the elevators. Then find the mechanical room on the 52nd floor and manually close the vent dampers. The fire is feeding on airflow. Cut it off." Silence on the other end. Then David's voice, quieter, confused. "How do you know where the mechanical room is?" Norris didn't answer. John ended the call with a tap on the screen. Outside, the city blurred past, indifferent to the message being sent in flames and death. The Maybach changed course, heading back toward Lumen Sky. When they arrived, fire trucks choked the street, their lights strobing red chaos across glass and steel. Norris stayed in the vehicle while John went inside to handle authority, to be seen, to project control. She pulled out a tablet she'd borrowed from the car's console and began pulling threads. The gunman who delivered the message, the one who'd escaped through smoke and shadow, had a tattoo visible on his wrist in the security footage she'd archived to her phone. 3 overlapping circles forming a Venn diagram of violence. She ran it through pattern recognition forums, underground ink databases, the places where criminal aesthetics became searchable data. It took 11 minutes to get a hit. The mark belonged to fighters who trained at a private club called the Oxblood, a members-only boxing gym in the warehouse district that served as a front for something darker. The club's ownership traced back through shell companies to a Eurasian weapons network called the Sable Syndicate, an organization that moved rifles and grudges across borders with equal efficiency. She dug deeper. Cross-referenced shipment logs, port authority records, customs seizures from 3 years prior. John's name surfaced in an old case file, back when he was still Dae-jung, back when his empire was built on moving things governments didn't want moved. He'd collapsed a lucrative port route when he'd gone legitimate, cutting off the syndicate's access to West Coast distribution. They'd lost millions. Men who lose millions rarely forget. But the attack required more than motive. It required details, table assignments, elevator schedules, the exact moment when the privacy shades dropped on the western windows. That kind of intelligence came from inside, from someone with access to systems most staff never touched. Norris started scrubbing the boring pipelines, linen delivery logs, HVAC service tickets, dish machine repair orders, fire suppression system maintenance, the unglamorous infrastructure that kept a 51st floor palace running. Most of it was clean, routine, signed off by the expected vendors. But one work order stood out. Event cleaning scheduled for the day before the attack, signed off by the head of facilities but logged into the system by someone else. The username belonged to Marco Dima, the maitre d', a man whose job description had nothing to do with HVAC paperwork. When John returned to the car, his face was stone. Miguel didn't make it. They found him near the loading dock. Smoke inhalation. He paused, then added, "There was a message painted on the service wall. Kings can bleed." Norris handed him the tablet. "Your maitre d' has been filing facilities, work orders. He has no authority to touch. Someone taught him how to access back-end systems." John's eyes narrowed. "Marco has been with me for 8 months. He came highly recommended." "By who?" John didn't answer immediately. Then, quietly, Sung-ho. They brought Marco into a private room at John's penthouse 2 hours before dawn. The maitre d' was a narrow man in his 30s, handsome in the way that helped him manage the egos of billionaires and celebrities. But under the pendant lights of John's study, his charm evaporated into sweat and trembling hands. Norris set a forged work order on the table between them. "You created a facility access request the day before 5 men tried to kill your boss. Explain." Marco's face crumbled. "My sister. She has cancer. Stage 3. The treatments, the experimental drugs, I couldn't afford them. Someone reached out, said they could help, said all I had to do was pass along scheduling details, table layouts. When the shades dropped for privacy, I didn't know they'd come with guns. I swear I didn't know." John rose from his chair, his body coiled to strike. Norris stepped between them, her hand raised in a gesture that was neither pleading nor commanding, just final. "He's worth more alive," she said. "His handler is the one we need. His handler used him to kill my people." John replied, his voice low and dangerous. "And if you kill Marco, the handler disappears and we learn nothing." Norris turned to the maitre d'. "Give me a name." "I don't have a name. Just a voice on encrypted calls." They called themselves Whisper. Norris pulled out her phone and typed rapidly. "We set up a dummy courier run. Make Whisper think you're moving the bearer bonds you keep in the vault. When they try to intercept, we trace them back to their staging ground." John considered this, his rage leashed but still burning. Finally, he nodded. In the corner of the study, Bae Sung-ho stood with arms crossed, his face carved from skepticism and disdain. "You want us to trust the word of a traitor and run an operation based on audits and paperwork? We should hit the Oxblood tonight, burn it down, send a message." Norris studied him. His objection came too fast, too eager, like a script he'd been waiting to deliver. "How would you structure the convoy route?" Sung-ho didn't hesitate. He pulled a folded map from his jacket pocket, already marked with routes, checkpoints, and fallback positions. "Too prepared. Too perfect. I'll handle logistics," Norris said, taking the map from his hands. Their eyes met. His held contempt. Hers held calculation. The convoy rolled out 36 hours later. 3 vehicles, staggered intervals, encrypted comms. Norris rode in the second vehicle, a tablet on her lap displaying satellite imagery of the port district. She'd circled 2 choke points in red, places where containers stacked high enough to create kill boxes. Places she'd specifically routed them away from. Over the comm system, Sung-Ho's voice crackled through. Left at the blue crane. No lights. Norris's eyes widened. That turn wasn't on any plan she'd approved. That turn led directly into the second choke point she'd marked. She reached for the comm button, but the world went black as the driver cut the headlights and turned left into the mouth of the trap. If this story grabbed you by the throat and didn't let go, maybe it's time you stop watching in silence and let the algorithm know someone out here still craves truth over comfort. The port district materialized through fog, like a city drowned and resurrected in rust. Sodium lights bled orange through the mist, turning the stacked containers into metal cathedrals that swallowed sound and spat back echoes. Norris felt the vehicle turn left at the blue crane, felt the geometry of the trap close around them like jaws, and knew with absolute certainty that they'd been sold. The first gunshot cracked the night before she could warn anyone. The windshield spiderwebbed. The driver's head snapped back. The vehicle lurched sideways and slammed into a container wall with a sound like thunder trapped in a tin can. Muzzle flashes strobed the fog, turning the world into a nightmare of light and shadow. Norris felt the rear door buckle under automatic fire, felt shrapnel tear through her left shoulder, hot and sharp and intimately familiar. In the lead vehicle, John kicked his door open and rolled into cover behind a wheel assembly. A round grazed his ribs, splitting fabric and skin in a line of fire. He didn't scream. He counted shooters by muzzle flash, calculated angles, and returned fire with cold precision. 2 shots. An engine block ahead erupted in steam and oil. The shooters using it for cover scrambled. Norris shoved her door open and hit the ground running, despite the blood soaking through her jacket. She spotted a pallet jack abandoned near a loading dock, its forks rusted but the frame intact. She grabbed it and flipped it onto its side, creating a mobile barrier of steel. Bullets sparked off metal as she shoved it forward, using it to shield her advance toward John's position. 12 yards. You're 3 o'clock. She shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos with the flat certainty of someone who'd done this in worse places. She kicked a wheel chock across the ground. It jammed under the front tire of an approaching truck, sending it into a skid that blocked the eastern route. John processed her distance call, noted she'd used yards instead of meters, filed it away as another piece of evidence that Norris Clayton had been trained by Americans in American facilities. He shifted right, acquired target, and put 2 rounds through the manifold of the closest assault vehicle. The engine seized with a shriek. Steam and smoke billowed. "Drainage tunnel, 40 yards north," Norris called out. She'd memorized the port's infrastructure the night before. Every map she could pull, every maintenance schematic. John didn't question. He ran. She covered the pallet jack, taking rounds that would have opened his spine. They hit the tunnel access together, dropped through a rusted grate, and vanished into the dark as the kill box above them erupted in confusion and rage. 2 hours later, in the sterile luxury of John's penthouse, Norris sat shirtless at his kitchen island, while he extracted shrapnel from her shoulder using a pair of bar tongs, a lighter for sterilization, and vodka that cost more than most people's rent. She didn't make a sound, didn't flinch, just stared at the city lights beyond the window and breathed through the pain like it was an old friend. "You're going to have a scar," John said, his hands steadier than they had any right to be. "I have a lot of those," Norris replied. John poured the vodka over the wound. It hissed and steamed. Norris's jaw tightened, but she didn't pull away. When he finished, he sat back and studied her with eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by surfaces anymore. "You don't have a gang problem," Norris said quietly. "You have a faith problem. You trusted Sung-Ho because he spoke your language, because he came from the same world. But loyalty bought with violence expires the moment someone offers more." John didn't argue. He couldn't. The truth sat between them like a third presence, undeniable and cold. His phone lit up on the counter. Not a call, a video message. John opened it, and the screen filled with his half-sister's face. Hyren was 32. Delicate features framed by terror, her wrists bound with zip ties to a metal chair. Behind her, the city sprawled in miniature through a floor-to-ceiling window. They were on a rooftop. Behind Hyren, stepping into frame, was Bai Sung-ho. Bring the bearer bonds to the Zenith Tower rooftop in 2 hours, Sung-ho said, his voice carrying the kind of calm that came from holding all the cards. Come alone, or I throw her. You went soft, Daejung. You thought money could replace fear. Tonight you learn the price of forgetting who you were. The video ended. John's hand trembled around the phone, rage and desperation warring behind his eyes. Norris could see him calculating violence, considering the direct approach, the bloody solution. She put her hand over his. If you go in hot, she dies. Let me work. 20 minutes later, Norris stood on the street below the Zenith Tower, studying wind patterns on her phone, overlaying NOAA data with building schematics. The tower was 43 stories of glass and steel, its maintenance routes documented in city permits she'd pulled an hour ago. Window washer anchors ran up the eastern face, each one rated for 800 pounds and inspected monthly. She'd need rope, a harness, and the kind of certainty that came from having nothing left to lose. She found a service entrance, bypassed the lock with a bent credit card and old habits, and climbed. The rope she'd brought was thin but military grade, knotted every 3 feet for grip. She clipped herself to the window washer track and began ascending the skin of the building, her wounded shoulder screaming protest with every pull. The wind buffeted her 40 stories up, gusts that could rip a climber free and turn them into a red smear on pavement. But Norris had learned to read wind the way other people read faces. She timed the lulls, moved during the calm, and froze when the gusts came. On the rooftop, Sung-ho stood with Hyren at the edge, his hand gripping her arm. He was delivering a speech about strength and weakness, about how John had betrayed the old ways by choosing legitimacy over loyalty. He didn't see Norris pull herself over the ledge behind him. Didn't hear her footsteps because the wind swallowed sound. She timed the next gust, a big one that rattled the HVAC units and made Sung-ho brace himself. Then she ran. Her shoulder connected with his ribs at full speed, driving him sideways toward the ledge. His eyes widened. He tried to grab her, but she was already twisting, her hands moving with brutal efficiency. She unclipped Hyren from the chair and clipped her to the harness rope in one fluid motion. Then she planted her feet and shoved Sung-ho hard. He didn't fall 43 stories. He fell 12 feet onto a maintenance terrace that jutted from the 42nd floor, a platform designed for HVAC repair. He landed badly. Bones cracked. He screamed. But he was alive. 30 minutes later, in the back of John's Maybach with Hyren wrapped in a blanket and sobbing quietly, Norris held a laptop open on her knees. Sung-ho's encrypted drive had cracked easier than expected. Desperation made people sloppy with passwords. The files inside were a roadmap of corruption. Syndicate ledgers detailing weapons, shipments, bribe payments to a customs official named Greaves, and schedules for a bearer bond pickup at a location called Garnet Warehouse, set for 48 hours from now. We can end this clean, Norris said, uploading the files to an encrypted server with a timer attached. I have a contact at Interpol who's been looking for a way into the Sable Syndicate for 3 years. We give them this, time to the bond pickup, and they do the work. No bodies, no war. Just handcuffs. John stared out the window, his reflection ghosted in the glass. Helicopters drummed the air in the distance, their rotors a countdown to choices that couldn't be undone. He pulled a pistol from the console and checked the magazine with hands that remembered every trigger pull. Every life taken. No second chances, he whispered. Exactly why we give them handcuffs, Norris replied. The upload timer hit 0. Somewhere in Brussels, an Interpol task force received an anonymous package that would rewrite their case files. Somewhere in the Port District, Syndicate soldiers prepared for a bond exchange that would become their last free act. And in the back of a Maybach racing through Los Angeles rain, 2 people who'd been strangers 72 hours ago made a choice between the past and something that might finally look like a future. Funny how you'll binge-watch someone else's survival, but won't Spend 3 seconds helping this story reach someone who needs to remember that protection beats revenge every single time. Garnet Warehouse squatted in the industrial maze like a monument to things the city pretended not to see. Forklifts sat abandoned mid-lane, their forks raised like surrendering hands. Bond crates rested on a dolly near the loading dock, wrapped in plastic and lies. The air tasted of diesel and salt, and the particular tension that comes right before violence rewrites the terms of power. Sirens swelled in Doppler waves, drawing closer, a sound John Donald had spent a decade learning to outrun. Tonight he was letting them come. The syndicate's regional head stood near the crates, a man named Volkov whose face carried the kind of cruelty that came from never being told no. He wore a tailored coat over tactical gear, vanity and violence sharing the same skin. 6 armed men flanked him, their weapons trained on the warehouse entrance where John stood with his pistol raised, finger resting along the frame, not the trigger. Not yet. You brought the bonds, Volkov said, his accent thick with Eastern Europe and Starry World brutality. Smart. Maybe you remember the old ways after all, Daejung. John's aim didn't waver. His body remembered 1,000 moments like this, when power was measured in who bled first. But behind him, just out of the light, Norris stood with a phone in her hand, watching a countdown tick toward 0. The upload had synchronized perfectly. The task force had received everything. Now it was just a matter of seconds. The old ways got people killed, John replied. I'm trying something different. Volkov laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Different is just another word for weak. The first helicopter crested the warehouse roof before he could finish the thought. Then, another. Then 6 more, their searchlights turning night into interrogation. Tactical vans crashed through the perimeter gates, disgorging teams in Interpol raid gear, their weapons raised. Their voices amplified through speakers that turned orders into biblical commandments. Drop your weapons. Hands visible. This is your only warning. Volkov's face transformed from confidence to confusion to something approaching terror. His men hesitated, caught between loyalty and survival. John lowered his pistol. Not holstered, just lowered, making the choice visible. Legal over lethal, protection over fear. The takedown happened with the choreographed brutality of people who'd trained for exactly this. Volkov went to his knees, hands zip-tied behind his back, his coat riding up to expose the weapon harness beneath. His men followed, one by one, their resistance evaporating under the weight of international authority. No shots fired, no bodies dropped. Just handcuffs clicking like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence the syndicate thought they were writing. In a surveillance van parked 3 blocks away, Marco Dima watched the arrests unfold on a monitor. His face wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Just 7 words followed by a hospital invoice marked, "Paid in full." Your sister's treatments are covered. Disappear. Marco closed his eyes and let relief drown him. The cameras arrived within minutes, because violence in Los Angeles always drew cameras faster than it drew ambulances. News vans, local affiliates, freelance stringers with phones held high. They caught John Donald shielding Hyrin with his body, guiding her away from the lights toward a waiting vehicle. They caught him directing his staff, ensuring everyone was accounted for, playing the role of protector with the kind of conviction that could rewrite a reputation overnight. The tiger from Busan was becoming something else in real time, something the headlines would struggle to categorize. Norris stayed in shadow, exactly where she wanted to be. When a camera swung her direction, she stepped behind a shipping container and vanished. She was the architecture that made the moment possible, the blueprint no one would see. That was fine. That was safer. In a police holding bay that smelled of concrete and old fear, they brought Sung Ho in on a stretcher, his legs shattered, his face a mask of pain and rage. John stood over him, the pistol back in his hand, the weight of it familiar and seductive. It would be easy. 1 shot. Justice delivered in the language Sung Ho understood best. He sold you, John said quietly. He sold Hyrin. He sold everyone who trusted him. 1 bullet ends it. Norris stepped forward and placed her palm over the barrel, not pushing it away, just making contact. Making the choice physical. If you kill him, you bury what you're trying to build, she said. Her voice carried no judgment, just geometry. This angle or that one. This future or that one. Every camera out there just watched you protect people. You pull this trigger, and they watch you become the story you've been running from for a decade. John's hand trembled. The gun felt heavier than it had any right to. He thought about Busan, about the men he'd killed to survive, about the empire built on their bones. He thought about Hayrin's face on that video, about Miguel burning in the wine cellar, about the choice between legacy and legend. Then he holstered the weapon. It cost him. It saved him. The fallout moved fast. The ledgers Norris had uploaded triggered a cascade of arrests across 3 port authorities. Customs official Benjamin Greaves was perp-walked out of his office at dawn, his face hidden behind a jacket held by federal marshals. Shell companies collapsed. Bank accounts froze. The Sable Syndicate's West Coast operations evaporated like fog under searchlights. But Whisper, the handler who'd turned Marco and orchestrated the first attack, that number went dark. Not dead. Just deeper. Threats didn't die. They just learned patience. The sun rose over Los Angeles, with the slow inevitability of something that had seen worse and would again. Norris stood on John's penthouse balcony, the city sprawling below her in glass and promise and 10,000 secrets. Her flip phone vibrated in her pocket, the cheap plastic buzzing against her ribs like a wasp trapped in fabric. She pulled it out. 3 words on the screen. No sender, no signature. Contract reinstated. Run. John stepped beside her, his suit jacket gone, his shirt open at the collar so the tattoos showed fully now. No more hiding. If they want you dead for helping me, they want me for the same reason. Norris didn't smile, didn't make promises about staying or leaving. She just looked at the phone, then at the city, then at the man who'd chosen handcuffs over bullets because she'd shown him there was a choice at all. She powered the phone off. Didn't throw it away, didn't smash it, just turned it off. The decision was temporary, but the meaning was permanent. Partnership, equal power, equal risk, not fear, protection. 3 miles away on a rooftop that overlooked the port, a figure in dark tactical gear lowered a pair of binoculars and spoke into an encrypted radio. She chose her side. The reply came through clean and cold. Good. Now she's visible. The city kept breathing, kept spinning, kept pretending it was civilized. But someone was watching. Someone was waiting. And the story that had started with 5 men in a shattered window was just the opening chapter of something much larger, much darker, much more patient than revenge. You've watched 4 chapters of people choosing protection over fear. But if you close this tab without subscribing, you're choosing silence over the next move. Someone's planning in the shadows.